Hi, I'm Jana Clement, and today we will be discussing torque and power and their effects in the glute-ham developer, or GHD sit-ups. The GHD sit-up is also known as the Roman chair sit-up. It is a common exercise performed in the CrossFit community and aims to improve strength in your glutes, hamstrings, and abdominals. When the exercise is performed, a force is applied at the torso that allows the torso to rotate around its axis of rotation, which you'll notice in these photos is represented by the blue dot and arrow. Anatomically, it's located at the lumbar spine and hip joint. Torque is a force that is applied at some distance from the axis of rotation and is perpendicular to the lever arm. The lever arm is also perpendicular to the point of rotation. In a GHD sit-up, the lever arm is the torso, which is perpendicular to the lumbar facet joints. The shorter the lever arm, the less torque is produced. That's not good news for me, since I'm just over 5 feet and compared to all my friends, I have a lot less torque to produce with my short torso. When hip flexors and torso flexors contract, torque is applied slightly superior to the axis of rotation. Contracting of the muscles pulls the center of gravity towards the feet. The torso rotates about the horizontal axis into the sagittal plane, as before. The radius perpendicular to the axis of rotation may affect torque during this exercise because torque is the product of force and distance. Because an object's acceleration is the net result of any and all forces acting on the object, as we described by Newton's second law, we can then conclude that a smaller distance requires more torque to generate acceleration, and as the torso rotates, centripetal force will be created towards the axis of rotation. According to Blasevic, angular acceleration is equal to the force applied at a distance divided by I, which is the resistance to motion. When a constant torque is applied, the greater the inertia is, the slower the acceleration will be. The lower the inertia is, the faster the acceleration will occur. It can be concluded that in order to complete as many sit-ups as possible in the least amount of time, inertia needs to be as low as possible. The most beneficial way of doing this is by bringing the arms in closer to the midline of the body. As we discussed in the past few slides, inertia and lever arm length can affect the torque of an exercise. Because the amount of torque applied in a GHD sit-up is low, it would be beneficial to reduce the amount of inertia to produce greater acceleration. Therefore, the further the hands are from the axes of rotation, the greater the moment of inertia relative to the axes. More torque must be created from contracting muscles to produce the desired rotation. For desired movement and speed, the athlete's arms should be in towards the trunk. Additionally, we can say that the longer the moment arm, the larger amount of torque compared to a small lever arm. In order for the GHD sit-up to be performed, the athlete will combine all biomechanical factors to include work, power, and energy, which can be seen and manipulated in order to enhance the performance of the GHD sit-up. Let's discuss these in a little bit more detail. The anterior musculature of the trunk and hip are performing the majority of the work to fulfill the movement of the GHD sit-up. These muscles act concentrically while flexion is occurring and at the hips and lumbar spine, and eccentrically while the athlete returns to the extended position. In order for motion to occur, the force generated by the muscles must be greater than the moment of inertia, and the force must remain constant throughout the range of motion. This process is repeated during each repetition of the sit-up. Work itself can be manipulated by decreasing the distance traveled by completion of the exercise, which overall would improve the power output, or completing the sit-up in the least amount of time, which is the ultimate goal. Performing exercises in mid-ranges decreases the risk of injury due to muscular strength being the strongest within the mid-ranges of motion compared to at the end range of the motion. Power is generated through muscular work in the starting or extended position until the athlete reaches full hip and lumbar flexion. In order to generate greater power, work must be performed forcefully to reduce the amount of time it takes to perform each repetition. As previously stated, power can be manipulated by decreasing the distance that needs to be traveled while maintaining the same force. And if that's the case, I might actually have an up on some of my friends, because the distance it takes for me to travel to complete a sit-up is less than those who have a larger torso. With the GHD sit-up incorporating a large eccentric range of motion, power can be negatively effective as the subject fatigues. Eccentric contractions result in greater fatigue and possible damage to musculature, as they impair the athlete's ability to maintain steady forces. Energy is broken into two forms, kinetic and potential energy. Kinetic energy is relative to motion of an object. During a GHD sit-up, kinetic energy is greatest at the middle of the motion. An object with a greater mass or velocity also has a greater kinetic energy. Potential energy, on the other hand, is associated with position and can also be associated with velocity and motion. That is to say, if velocity is higher and kinetic energy is greater, potential energy is also greater. Throughout the exercise, the total energy remains the same sum, but kinetic and potential energy values will differ. The power that we use to create the movement comes from muscle contractions. Muscles consume energy through a series of metabolic processes and is known as metabolic energy. The law of conservation of momentum states that the momentum of a system remains unchanged unless it is acted upon by an external force. In a collision, the total momentum of the system equals the sum of the mass times velocity of all colliding objects. It may be easy to work out what might happen in a collision, but in this case, collision is less common than the topic of momentum itself, because there's only one athlete performing this exercise. We mentioned that momentum is conserved unless an external force acts. In the GHD sit-up, the athlete is applying a force to the GHD machine during the sit-up exercise, and the opposite force is applied back at her. Collision is not the main concern as there is no additional impact from another player, but the more momentum the athlete can produce, the less fatigued she'll get, and the more productive she is in the exercise. We hope you enjoyed learning a bit more on the biomechanics of a GHD sit-up.